we will glance through Gita Dhyanam, the meditation on the Gita. It's a composition of 9 verses from the Vaishnaviya Tantra Sara. It's not from the Gita itself. And it gives us a way to think about the Gita. How can we meditate on the Gita? So based on the teachings of the Gita and its background, we have these verses. So first verse says, Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam. Om is the pranava sound, and traditionally all our works, chanting, everything that we do begins with Om. Most auspicious sound, Om. So before we do any action, we say Om. Before we chant anything, we say Om. Before we give something, we should say Om. That is an auspicious sign. We sanctify, we purify, we make it holy by saying Om. You can make an elaborate commentary on Om, on that sound Om. It's a sound that represents the Absolute. We say Brahman, which has no name, which has no form, yet we have to represent it by some symbol, some sound, some name. So we say Om. Om is the only name by which you can represent the Absolute, Brahman. If you analyze it or if you structure it, then you will find that Om has 4 parts. There is an A, U, and silence. So A, and in the Mandukya Upanishad it says, Om iti etad aksharam idam sarvam. All this, everything is Om. Whatever was in the past, whatever is in the present, whatever is in the future, that is also Om. What is this Om? How can everything be Om? Om is an elaboration of our different states of consciousness. From the Upanishadic point of view, or from the Rishis' knowledge, they say that we have a consciousness which alternates, which is fluctuating, which is transforming. It has 4 states. It can reduce all our varied experiences into 4 states of consciousness. They are called the wakeful state, the dream state, and the deep sleep state. When we wake up in the morning and you see the subject, yes, yourself, and you see the objective world, you see the events taking place, vyavahara, you transact, you have a distinct sense of me and the other. That is a type of consciousness. That is called the wakeful consciousness. And wakeful consciousness is described by the sound A, or in Sanskrit they say akara, jagrat avastha. Coming into the wakeful consciousness is A. Just like the mouth is opened, wide open when you say Ah, our consciousness is also wide open. We are awake to the outside world. There is a second state of consciousness which we say is U. U state of consciousness is when we go inward, when you go into the dream state of consciousness. Now you are not aware of the outside world. The objects are not stationary. In the dream, anything can happen. A table can start flying, things start transforming. So the rigidity of the objective world is not there in the dream state. You yourself are observing your own mental creations. In dream, the dreamer is watching his own dream. You say that is ukara, second state of consciousness. And then there is a third state when we go into deep sleep. You become completely unconscious. You don't know what is happening to you, what is happening around you. If somebody is coming in the room or going out of the room, you're not aware of anything. You become absorbed in deep sleep. You go into the deep unconscious. And that is symbolized by the sound That's called makara. And just like the mouth is closed when you say your consciousness is also closed when you go into deep sleep. So we have wakeful consciousness, dream consciousness, deep sleep consciousness. This is called the bhavatraya, the 3 states of consciousness that are changing, alternating All human beings experience these three states of consciousness: wakeful, dream and deep sleep. But after we have a pause, we have a silence. We say Om, like a funnel that is tapering. Our consciousness also tapers and it comes to a silence, stillness. That silence represents the fourth state of consciousness. The fourth state of consciousness is called Turiyam. Turiyam means the fourth. Actually, we cannot give it any name. It has no name. But for the sake of symbolizing it, for the sake of recognizing it, we say Turiyam. This is the fourth state. And this is the most fascinating state because this is the ground. This is the superconscious state which the yogis attain, which the rishis have attained, which is a pure state of consciousness in which there is no modulation, no change. It's an unchanging, unbroken state of consciousness which is full of ananda. It is the foundation of all the other states. The other three states are transforming. This state does not transform. It's transcendental. It's untainted. It has no beginning, no end. It is pure consciousness. That is Turiyam. That is the fourth state. So it is described as Achintayam, Alakshanam, Shantam, Shivam, Advaitam. Achintayam means it is so unique, so wonderful that the mind cannot grasp it. The mind cannot conceive of what it is. You cannot make a mental concept of what it is. It's beyond the mind's ability to grasp. It is super conscious. In our experience, we always come to a limit beyond which the mind cannot think. Supposing we say time, that is eternal. We can't imagine what it is like. Everlasting. How big is everlasting? We can't say how big it is. It is beyond our mind's comprehension. So similarly, Turiya is also beyond. You say that is Achintayam. It is superconscious. And then you say Alakshanam. Lakshana means it has some distinguishing mark. That gives a lakshana. I am holding a book in my hand. It has pages, it has covers, it has writing on it. These are the lakshana that it is a book. If I see an object lying there with these characteristics, I can recognize it and say, oh, this is a book. The lakshana is there. Similarly, if I make a drawing, newspapers sometimes make cartoons of certain people. So what do? They just make certain characteristics of that person. Maybe that person has got a big nose, so they'll just make a large nose. That's enough. That's a lakshana. You recognize immediately who that represents. That's called lakshanam. Alakshanam means it has no lakshana. It has no distinguishing mark by which you can recognize it. Achintayam, alakshanam, shantam, shivam, advaitam. Shantam means it is a state of peace, always peaceful. In Turiya there is no agitation. It is peace through and through. Shivam, auspicious. It is auspicious. And Advaitam, it is non-dual. There is no sense of duality. There is no division there between me and you, us, them, before, after, above, below, past, present, future. None of these divisions. We have become conscious of divisions only in the wakeful level. But at the Turiya level, everything is one primordial reality alone is. That basic truth alone is abiding. So that's the state we are trying to attain. There are many people, yogis and rishis, who have attained that fourth state of consciousness. So everything that happens in this world has to happen only in these four states of consciousness. Either we are doing our day-to-day duties and jobs, we are in the wakeful state, or we are in the state where we make plans, we make projects. That is our dream state. In our consciousness we can make a scheme, we can make a plan, we can think about what we will do tomorrow. That's all in the subjective consciousness. Dream means not necessarily just the dream you have when you go to sleep, but dream also means the thoughts that we have. Supposing I am reading a book, then I am going from the wakeful consciousness to dream consciousness. Supposing I am writing a letter to my friend, then from my dream consciousness I am putting my thoughts into words. As my thought comes into my mind, I quickly write it down. So I'm going from dream consciousness to wakeful consciousness. So we can move back and forth between one state to the other state. And then at night everything is hushed, absorbed like a seed. The seed contains the essence of the whole plant. The whole experience of the day goes into the seed in deep sleep state. Processing is going on there. The new experiences we have gained during that day, that will go into our deep unconscious, and it will make changes. It will transform itself. It will modify itself. It will make a fresh experience. So all our experiences are being re-recorded, re-registered. It's like a filing cabinet. All the files are preserved there, and all the files will be opened up. Old files will be revalued, new files will be written down. It's exactly like that. That's happening in the deep unconscious, deep sleep state. It happens on its own without our conscious knowledge. And from there, when it springs out as dreams, we watch it. Where does dream come from? From our own memories, dreams are created. Sometimes if you are watching your dream, all the experiences you had, they will start coming out in your dream. So this is how the three states of consciousness are always revolving. So either we are experiencing dream state, or we are in deep sleep state, or we are in the wakeful state. These are only the possibilities. That is why they say everything is Om. All that we experience can only happen in these four states of consciousness. And Om is representing the four states of consciousness. This is the Upanishadic way of understanding Om. And when we understand this, it takes us to our own foundation, the consciousness in us which is our true nature and our own essential real nature, that is the Turiya nature. We are striving to go towards Turiya. That is how, by chanting Om, we are directing our mind to that reality. So that is how the jap of Om is so important. That is why so much of importance is given to Om. Om is the word, it is the akshara that represents Om Tat Sat. That is real. Tat Sat. These are the ways in which Om is meditated upon. So here also we start with Om by saying Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam. Partha is Arjuna, because Arjuna's mother was Prithi. Kunti had another name called Prithi. And Kunti was once entertaining a rishi called Durvasa, who was known for his terrible temper. Durvasa was an angry rishi who used to lose his temper and then curse people. So once he called on their home, so Kunti was the hostess, she was serving him, and at one point he made her kneel down and placed the hot food on her back and ate it, but she did not complain. So he was so pleased that he gave her a boon, and he said that I will give you a mantra, and whenever you want to have a child, with this mantra you can invoke any of the devatas, any of the gods, and through parthogenesis or asexual method of reproduction you can have any number of children. So Kunti, being young and full of curiosity, she tried the mantra and she called the sun god. And when the sun god came, then she said, no, I was just trying out the mantras. So the sun god said, no, if you have called me, I cannot go back without fulfilling my duty. So she had her first child, which was Karna. He was born from the ear. And fearing social scandal, she put the child in a basket and set him afloat in the river. And further down, a charioteer, they are called Sutas, he found him and he brought him up in his house because they were childless. They were happy to find a child. So he came to be known as a Sutaputra, the son of a charioteer. Though by birth he was a noble prince, in the eyes of society he was only a Sutaputra. This was the tragedy of Karna. Karna was a tragic hero. So Partha, of course, refers to Arjuna, and Prithi is Kunti. Pratibodhitam is the next word. Wherever you hear the word bodh, it means consciousness, buddhi. Pratibodhitam. So he was instructed. Arjuna was instructed or taught by Narayana himself. The Lord himself instructed Arjuna. Lord Narayana in the form of Krishna. And Vyasa inserted this teachings in the middle of the Mahabharata. That's what he says. Vyasena Grathitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharata. Vyasa is called a Purana Muni. Muni means one who is in Mauna, one who is contemplative, one who is silent by nature, which means he is a deep thinker. People who are silent are supposed to be deep. Still waters run deep. And people who talk too much, they are considered as shallow. So when he said Purana Muni, he said Vyasa was a great rishi, great thinker. He had a deep understanding, insight of human nature. He knew what human life was, what was the purpose of creation. All these fundamental questions were known to him. That is why he is called a Muni, a wise person, a sage. Ancient, from ancient times, Purana Muni. This Vyasa inserted this Gita in the middle of the Mahabharata. As we said earlier, right in the center of the Mahabharata, you will find 700 verses which are the Bhagavad Gita. Advaita Amrita Varshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim. Advaita Amrita Varshinim. What does the Gita do? The Gita showers the nectar of non-duality. In the Vedanta philosophy, our problems in life, our unhappiness of life, our obstacles in life are created by this Dvaita, by this duality. If we see life as dualities, as attractions and repulsions, gains and losses, victories and defeat, honor and dishonor, friend and foe, us and the other, these dual factors contribute to the miseries of life, the conflicts of life, the problems of life. And the way to resolve this is to become an Advaitin, to become a non-dualist. See the one principle that is behind everything, the common one that is sustaining everything. If you see that one, you start experiencing harmony. All the divisions, the dualities get resolved into one common unity. You become a unified person, and that is called Advaita. So what India contributed to the thoughts of the world was the philosophy of monism, Advaita. No other religion in the world could produce Advaita. Everybody had Dvaita between God and the person. There is a division, there is a separation. But this has Advaita, non-separation, non-duality. And it showers the nectar of non-duality. If you have a non-dual mind, you will experience Ananda, Amritam. There is no death for a non-dualistic person. Only as long as you have duality, you think of birth and death. Once you have non-dual thinking, you have transcended death. There is no death for you then. So Advaita Amrita Varshini. Varshini means showering. It's not a small benefit that you receive, but you receive a shower of Amritam, shower of nectar. Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim. It is in 18 chapters. Ashtadasha, Ashta means 8, Dasha means 10, Ashtadasha means 18. Adhyaya are chapters. This book is of 18 chapters. Amba Tvam Anusantadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim. Amba Tvam Anusantadhami. It is called Amba. Amba means a mother. Just like a mother comforts a child, a mother can comfort one in distress, a mother can nourish a person. Similarly, the Gita is also treated as a mother, to whom you can go when you need comfort, to whom you can go when you need inspiration, to whom you can go when you need spiritual nourishment. So, Amba Tvam Anusantadhami. Anusantadhami means, I meditate on you, O Mother. Bhavadveshinim. Dvesha means phenomenal pains, miseries, or conflicts, or hatreds, feeling of being rejected, feeling ill will against something or somebody. That is dvesha. Bhavadveshini means it removes all these dveshas. It will remove all the bitterness from a person's life. It will make a person's life pure, sublime, happy. So this is the first meditation on the Gita. Amba Tvam Anusantadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim. Then the second verse says, Namo Astute Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Phulla Arabinda Ayata Patra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha prajvalito jnanamayah pradipah. Now the method the author has used is poetic allegories. Today's world is scientific world, we are used to facts. If you say a spade is a spade, you say that is fact. But if you say the spade is a farmer's pen, that is poetry. Just like a writer uses a pen, that's his tool with which he expresses himself. Similarly, a farmer uses a spade to do his work. So similarly, here we have poetical ways of expressing the beauty and the sublime messages of the Gita. Namaha is always I salute you. Namaha te, I salute you. And the rule of grammar is that when you join two words, namaha and te, the ha will become sa to make easy joining. And so you say namaste. The sandhi rules. I salute you. Namahate, namaste, Vyasa Vishala Buddhe. So here we are saluting Vyasa. We salute Vyasa because he is the one who has written this Gita, and he is a Vishala Buddhe. Vishala means expansive, vast, great Buddhi. His intellect is great and vast. It's a great intellectual, Vishala Buddhe. Phulla Arabinda Ayata Patra Netra. Phulla Arabinda Ayata Patra Netra. His eyes are like the petals of a lotus flower. Lotus flower itself is very dear to all Indian poets and Indian thinkers because it grows in the water. It opens out in the morning, its petals turn towards the sun, it has such lovely colors and the bumblebees are attracted, and it's a big flower. So lotus is the most beautiful flower for the Indian poets. Phulla Arabinda means a full-bloomed lotus. Aravinda is another name for Padma, it's a lotus. Phulla Arabinda Ayata Patra Netra. Netra means the eye, Patra means the petal. So your eyes are like the petals of a full-blown lotus. Fully blossomed lotus, that's oval, long, big, attractive. And eyes are always a symbol of a person's mind. If you see a serene person, the eyes have that brightness in it, clarity in it. They're twinkling, they're sparkling. And if you meet a person of dullness, you see the eyes are also dull. So eyes are like windows to the soul. So Phulla Arabinda Ayata Patra Netra Yena Toya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajvalito Jnanamayah Pradipaha. Knowledge of the Mahabharata is compared to the lamp. Just like a lamp is burning here, the lamp has oil in it, and the lamp has to be lit at some point. So when I light the lamp, the flame burns. So this lamp is called the lamp of the Bharata. The oil in the lamp is the Mahabharata epic, and it's a wisdom lamp, Jnanamaya Pradipa. It's not an ordinary lamp, it's a lamp of wisdom that spreads the light of wisdom. Vyasa is the one who lit this lamp of wisdom, which is filled with the oil of the Mahabharata epic. The Mahabharata story is just like the oil that burns. Oil is what is producing the light. Similarly, the Mahabharata epic is like the source of wisdom, which is spreading, which is shining, and it is Vyasa who has lit that lamp. So we salute that Vyasa. Third verse, he says, Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetra Ekapanaye Jnana Mudraya Krishnaya Gita Amrita Duhe Namaha. Parijata is a tree in Vedic literature. It's a heavenly tree. And the belief is anybody who sits near the Parijata tree and makes a request, it's a wish-fulfilling tree. So, Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetra Ekapane. This is a description of Krishna. Those who go close to Krishna, he becomes like a Parijata tree. He fulfills all their desires, their wishes. Or you can say it is the summum bonum of eternal cosmology. This is a more philosophical way of understanding the same thing. That the Parijata tree represents the summum bonum, the highest value, eternal cosmology. Totra Vetra Ekapanaye. Pani means a hand, and Ekapani Totra Vetra means, you must remember, he is playing the role of a charioteer in the Mahabharata war. He is Arjuna's Sarthi, charioteer. And so a charioteer must hold a whip so that he can control the horses. So on one hand he is holding this whip. Jnana Mudraya Krishnaya Gita Amrita Duhe Namaha. Whereas in the other hand he has the Jnana Mudra. This is called the Jnana Mudra. You'll see many wise people are sitting with the Jnana Mudra. This is the absolute, Brahman. This is called the ego. This is the three gunas, Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. Normally the ego is joined to the three gunas and then it is getting affected by the three gunas. Slowly the ego is turned away from the gunas and it is joined to the absolute, joined to God. Once it is joined to God, it becomes steady and the three gunas can have their play. You witness the sporting of the three gunas that is going on in this creation, but yourself, your ego is joined to God. Your thinking has become firm and steady. You are not disturbed anymore. So this is Jnana Mudra. So in one hand he has got the whip, Totra Vetra Ekapanaye, Jnana Mudraya Krishnaya, Gita Amrita Duhe Namaha. Gita Amrita means the nectar of the Gita. He is milking the nectar of the Gita. Amrita Duhe Namaha. Krishna is extracting the immortal nectar of the Gita. The next verse makes this more clear when he says, Sarvo Upanishado Gavo, Dogdha Gopala Nandana, Partho Vatsah, Sudhir Bhokta, Dugdham Gita Amritam Mahat. Sarvo Upanishado Gavo. We say Gita's knowledge is derived from the Upanishads. The Upanishads are the Shrutis, the final teachings, the highest teachings that are being revealed through the Rishis. They discovered the highest truth and those truths are described in the Upanishads. Sarvo Upanishado Gavo. This is another symbolic way, imaginative way of expressing the idea that all the Upanishads are like cows. Dogdha Gopala Nandana. Dogdha means the cowherd, the person who is going to milk the cows. Who is that? That is Krishna. So Krishna is extracting the essence from all the Upanishads. Because if you look at a cow, what is the cow's essence? The cow's essence is its milk. The most useful product the cow is going to give you is its milk. Similarly, the Upanishads, if they are compared to cows, then Krishna is the one who is extracting the most wonderful thing from the Upanishads, the wisdom of the Upanishads. Partha Vatsaha. Vatsaha means a calf. When the calf is near the cow produces more milk. Similarly, because of Arjuna being close by, there is a possibility of milking more and more knowledge from the Upanishads. Sudhir Bhokta. Who is going to drink this milk? Who is enjoying this milk? Who is going to benefit by this milk? Sudhir. Sudhir means people of good minds, people of good intellects. They are the ones who are going to partake of this milk. Sudhir Bhokta. Dugdham Gita Amritam Mahat. And what is that milk? That is nothing other than the Gita Amritam, the nectar of the Gita. Gita Amritam Mahat, the great nectar of the Gita. If you read the Gita, you get the teachings of the Upanishads, the essence of the Upanishads. Then he says, Vasudeva Sutam Devam, Kamsa Chanura Mardanam, Devaki Paramanandam, Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Vasudeva Sutam Devam, Kamsa Chanura Mardanam. So he says he is son of Vasudeva. Suta, Vasudeva Sutam, son of Vasudeva. Kamsa Chanura Mardanam. These are two demonic people who were destroyed by Krishna. If you read the Leelas of Krishna, the stories of Krishna, especially in the Bhagavata, you know that Kamsa and Chanura were the two asuras who he killed. Kamsa was his uncle. Devaki Paramanandam, Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. He was Devaki's supreme bliss. She was in bliss because of Krishna. Devaki Paramanandam, Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Krishna has come as the Jagadguru. He is the world teacher. These lines give us the hint that Gita is a universal text. When they say Jagadguru, it means he is for all the people of the world. He is not for any particular sect or any particular group or any special persons. He is a Jagadguru, teacher of the world. Anybody who wants to benefit from his teachings can benefit. Now he gives us another symbol of the power and grace of Krishna and how we can overcome all obstacles of life if we have the grace of the Lord. Bhishma Drona Tata Jayadratha Jala Gandhara Nilotpala शल्यग्राहवती कृपेण वहनी कर्णेन वेलाकुला अश्वत्थाम विकर्ण घोर मकरा दुर्योधनावर्तिनी सोत्तीर्णा खलु पांडवै रणनदी कैवर्तकः केशवः. This is an imaginary battle river called the Rananadi. A river has two banks, and this river has to be crossed by the Pandavas. And the two banks are Bhishma and Drona. Jayadratha Jala, the water is Jayadratha, and there are rocks in the river. The rocks are the Gandharas. These are all the enemies of the Pandavas. Shalya Grahavati, there is a crocodile there, and that is Shalya. And water is flowing with a current. It's very swift and dangerous. That is Kripa. Kripa is the Vahani. Karnena Vela Kula. And there are waves that can overturn your boat. That is Karna. And Ashwathama and Vikarna, they are two sharks. And Duryodhana is like a whirlpool there. This is the kind of Rananadi. So if you just imagine, it has dangers on all sides. The banks, the water, the waves, the rocks, the crocodiles, the sharks and the whirlpools. Yet this river was crossed by the Pandavas. So Tirna Khalu Pandava Rananadi. This river was crossed by the Pandavas because Kaivartakaha Keshavaha. Keshava was your Kaivartak, your helmsman, the person who was guiding your boat, and therefore the Pandavas crossed this battle river. Then he comes to another vision of Parasharya Vacha Saroja Mamalam Gita Artha Gandha Utkatam. This is of a lotus flower. Parashara is the father of Vyasa, but Parasharya means son. Vyasa is also known as Parasharya. Parasharya Vacha Saroja Mamalam. You see, the words of Parashara or the words of Vyasa have created a huge lake. Amalam, pure lake, limpid lake. Of the words of Vyasa, from that was produced a lotus. And that lotus has a fragrance. And the fragrance of that lotus is nothing other than the meanings of the Gita. Nana Kyanaka Kesaram Harikatha Sambodhana Bodhitam. And then it has many small stamens. And the stamens are nothing other than the Harikathas. In the Mahabharata there are many small tales, that is the Harikatha. Nana Kyanaka Kesaram Harikatha Sambodhanam Abodhitam. Loke Sajjana Shatpadai Raharaha Pepiya Manam Muda Bhuyad Bharata Pankajam Kalimalaha Pradvamsinaha Sreyase. So this teaching of the Gita, when it is heard by good people, Sajjana Shatpadai Rahara, daily, day in and day out, Pepiya Manam Muda, as it is sucked day after day. The good people are compared to bees who come and they suck this nectar day after day, and that purifies them of the Kalimala. In this age of Kali, all the sinfulness or wrong actions or negativity or dirt that is incidental of this age of Kali Yuga, that gets washed off by the good teachings of the Mahabharata. These teachings will cleanse people of Kalimala. Then he says, Mukam karoti vachalam pangum langayate girim yat kripa tamaham vande paramananda madhavam. This is also another good verse for people who want to strengthen their faith. Mukam means a dumb person. Mukam karoti vachalam pangum langayate girim yat kripa tamaham vande paramananda madhavam. By the grace of God, the dumb person can become an orator. And Pangum Langayate Girim, a lame person can cross the mountains. Yat Kripa Tamaham Vande Paramananda Madhavam. O Supreme Madhava, blissful Madhava. If your grace is there, then even a dumb person can become an orator. And a lame person can cross mountains. So I adore that Madhava. Source of supreme bliss, he is Paramananda. Where do we get our Ananda from? Source of Ananda is none other than Madhava. This takes us to the last verse where he says, Yam Brahma, Varuna, Indra, Rudra, Maruta. These are all the Vedic gods. Brahma, Varuna, Indra, Rudra, Maruta. Maruta is the wind god. Rudra is the howler, makes people howl. Indra is the lord of the mind or lord of gods. Varuna is the lord of the waters, rain. Stunvanti divyaistavaihi. He whom Brahma, Varuna, Indra, Rudra and Marut ever praise with celestial hymns, whom the chanters of the Samaveda do extol with songs comprising the Vedas. So he is talking of that supreme which cannot be reached by any of the Vedic gods. Neither do the Samaveda. Samavedas are hymns that extol, cannot reach there. Neither do those of the Vedas with their subdivisions and their grammatical paragraphs, etc. Order, krama, these are the rules of grammar when they are writing the Vedic exegetics. He whom the contemplatives with minds merged therein and established firm in meditation can see. These external means are not possible. The devas cannot reach. But contemplatives with meditation in their mind, they can be merged and established firm in meditation can see, whose end is beyond the ken equally of gods and the rival spirits. Where is the end of the Supreme Being? Nobody knows. Such a divinity I offer adoration. So we can see we are going from Vedic to Vedantic. When we talk of Vedas, then we make devatas. We say Brahma Devata, we say Indra Devata, we say Varuna, we say Rudra, we say Marut. But when we are going to Vedanta, we are going to one beyond, which even the gods cannot reach, because it is the supreme, the transcendental. So this is the last verse, which is from the Gita Dhyanam. This is the meditation on Gita. This will give you again an idea of the meaning of the Gita and the attitude by which we approach the Gita teachings as a book of contemplation, a book of wisdom, book of good teachings, a book of the words of Shri Krishna, the essence of the Upanishads, and a book of teaching the transcendental science, that is the science which is beyond the ordinary or the Vedic type of religion, which is beyond that, beyond the gods to the one supreme. Not the pluralistic, but the monistic, the one supreme. Whereas if you are in Vedas, you are in polytheism, many gods. You are going to the one source from which everything has come. So it is teaching you of that one supreme self. So you can say that it is a book on wisdom. It's a book that is not teaching you rituals, but it is teaching you how to be a wise person, how to be a good person, and how to benefit from the grace of the Lord. So this is from the Vaishnaviya Tantra Sara, called the Gita Dhyanam.